What would happen if you owned a hospital worth hundreds of millions of dollars, with annual revenues reaching hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars, but ultimately still fell into a crisis? Why can places that seem to make money from every hospital bed, every pill, shut down after just a few years? The secret lies in a revenue stream that very few people notice, along with a massive cost machine that is never allowed to stop. And the hospital's most valuable asset turns out not to be the building. Let's explore this entire surprising and fascinating story together. The hospital does not sell medicine. They sell the most expensive readiness in the world. If you ask 100 people where a hospital makes its money, most will answer very quickly, from medicine, from hospital stays, or from bills so long that no one wants to read them all. But after years of tracking financial reports, hospital closures, and hundreds of business records, I realized everyone is looking in the wrong direction. What the hospital sells has never been just medicine. It is readiness. It sounds simple, but those two words are worth more than any pill. 3 in the morning. An ambulance rushes to the emergency door. The lights are still on. The automatic doors open. A team of doctors and nurses is already waiting, even though no one knew the vehicle would appear. A new employee whispers, "Did we know we had a patient coming?" The doctor just shakes his head. "No, we just know we have to be ready." That is what makes a hospital completely different from any other business model. A clothing store can close when there are no customers. A factory can reduce production when orders are low. A restaurant can let employees off early if there are no guests that night. But a hospital cannot. Even if only a few people walk in today, the entire machine must still operate as if a disaster could happen in 5 minutes. Operating rooms must be sterile. MRI machines must always be running. Ventilators must be ready. The blood bank must be full. The team of doctors, nurses, and technicians still work their full shifts. No one knows when the next call will come. The strange thing is that the exact time when nothing happens costs the most money. Outsiders see a quiet hallway. Hospital administrators see every penny silently disappearing every minute. The electricity is still running. Machines still consume power. The air conditioning maintains the standard temperature. Employees still get paid. The system must run flawlessly, even when not a single patient appears. That is the biggest paradox of this industry. Hospitals don't make money when everything is peaceful. They have to pay to maintain that peace. A chief financial officer once told me something I will never forget. "We don't sell surgeries." He paused for a few seconds and continued. "We sell the ability to perform a surgery the moment the first call rings." It sounds the same, but the reality is completely different. Patients don't buy a bed. They buy the right to have that bed at the exact moment they need it most. They don't buy an MRI machine. They buy the fact that the machine is always working as soon as the doctor requests it. They don't buy the doctor's time. They buy the doctor's presence when the clock strikes 3 in the morning. Therefore, the true value of a hospital has never been in concrete walls or medicine cabinets lining the hallway. The value lies in thousands of people and hundreds of machines coexisting in a state of readiness, 24 hours a day. And from the moment I understood that, an even bigger question began to emerge. If hospitals have to spend a massive amount of money just to maintain this readiness every day, then ultimately, where do they earn all that money back? The room that is not crowded but makes the most money in the hospital. If readiness is what the hospital sells, then the next question is very clear. Who pays the bill for that entire giant machine? I used to think the answer was in the emergency room. Every day, ambulances line up, patients coming in and out endlessly. On the outside, it looks like the place that makes the most money. But when the numbers are put on the table, everything is completely reversed. A financial manager pulled a report toward me and pointed to a few small lines. "You see the emergency department? I see it. Don't look at the number of people coming in. Look at the money left after they leave." The silence lasted for a few seconds. The number was almost nothing. He closed the file and smiled faintly. The real money, W, is in a much quieter place. The next morning, I walked past the diagnostic imaging area. No sirens, no sound of rushing people, no sight of doctors running down the hallway. Only a few patients waiting for their turn. A door opened. The MRI machine started running. 20 minutes later, the patient walked out. The room was silent again, as if no one had ever been there. A technician smiled slightly. "Over 30 more cases today." Just one short sentence, but enough for me to understand. That machine almost never rests. Then came the CT scan area. Then the laboratory. Then the cardiovascular center. Then the oncology department. Every place shared a common characteristic. Not too noisy, not too many people. But the expensive equipment was running almost continuously from morning to night. That is the cash flow that very few people notice. An imaging scan only takes a few dozen minutes. A blood test takes less time than a lunch break. A scheduled surgery is prepared many days in advance. There are no elements of surprise. There are no scenes of chaos. Everything goes exactly as planned. Because of this, the hospital controls almost the entire process. Equipment is used to the maximum. The team works on schedule. Time is almost never wasted. A surgeon once told me as he prepared to enter the operating room, "This case was scheduled 3 weeks ago." Meaning, everything is ready? He nodded. The operating room, medicine, equipment, the team. Everything is waiting for just one person. That is a huge difference. In the emergency room, the hospital has to chase the situation. But in scheduled treatments, the situation chases the hospital. All costs are calculated in advance. All resources are arranged precisely. That is why the seemingly most peaceful areas become the places that generate most of the revenue to maintain the whole system. The longer I observed, the more I realized a cold rule. A hospital cannot survive just on races against time. To survive, it needs rooms that are always fully booked every day, machines that are always being used, treatments that are planned weeks in advance. That is the silent cash flow, keeping thousands of lights in the hospital from ever turning off. But just when I thought I understood how that machine worked, another question arose. If these departments make so much money, why do so many hospitals continuously report losses and even have to close? The money-making rooms are silently. The question of why many hospitals still struggle, despite having departments that bring in massive revenues, was finally answered when I saw an internal statistical board that almost never appears to the public. There were no patient names on the board, no doctor names, just arrows connecting one department to another. At first, I didn't understand. Why is the money from the cardiology department flowing to the emergency department? The financial manager looked at me and answered very briefly. Because if we don't do that, the emergency room won't be able to open tomorrow morning. That was the moment I realized hospitals don't operate the way people think. It's like a giant ship. There are compartments continuously pumping water out to keep the ship afloat, but there are also compartments silently filling with water every day. The special thing is that passengers outside almost never realize it. That afternoon, the operating room lights were still on. A knee replacement surgery had just finished. Only a few minutes later, the room was cleaned to prepare for the next case. Everything went exactly as planned. At the other end of the hallway, the emergency department was completely different. An old man was brought in, a young man from a traffic accident, a child with a high fever. No one asked what kind of insurance they had. No one asked for payment in advance. A nurse pushed a stretcher and spoke quickly. Save the person first. That is an unchanging principle. But after every time the emergency doors close, another question arises in the accounting room. Who will pay that cost? There isn't always an answer. There are bills that are fully paid. There are bills that are only partially paid. And there are files that stay in the drawer forever. That money doesn't just disappear. It just moves somewhere else. A hospital director once compared this with a very easy-to-understand sentence. Every scheduled surgery is like someone bringing more fuel onto the ship. And emergency? That is the engine. It doesn't make much money, but if you turn it off, the whole ship will stand still. I began to look at everything in a different way. Every time a patient steps into the MRI room, every time a cardiology procedure is performed, every time a scheduled surgery is completed, it's not just one department being maintained. A portion of that money is silently keeping the emergency department lights on all night, then keeping the blood bank full, keeping the night shift team present when the alarm rings. On the outside, people only see their own bills. On the inside, every penny of revenue is divided up to feed a whole system that they never see. That is why a hospital cannot focus only on money-making departments. If one link disappears, the remaining links will also begin to shake. But then I realized there was a variable even more terrifying than which department is profitable and which is taking a loss. Because even when all departments are operating at full capacity, the hospital still might not keep its profits. Everything also depends on a person who almost never appears in the clinic. The person who actually holds the wallet to decide how much money the hospital will receive after each treatment. The person who never steps into the operating room, but decides the fate of the entire hospital. After days of tracking the cash flows inside the hospital, I thought I had found the answer. The more patients, the richer the hospital. It sounds very logical, until a chief financial officer pushed two almost identical files toward me. Same treatment, same doctor, same operating room, same time. He paused for a few seconds and then asked, "In your opinion, how much money did the hospital make from these two people?" I answered almost immediately, "Probably the same." He shook his head. "That is a mistake many people make." He opened the first file. The patient had private insurance. The payment was transferred quite quickly. Costs were fully covered, and the hospital even kept a portion of profit to continue operating. He opened the second file, the same treatment. But the payer was a public insurance program. The transferred amount was much lower. For some services, it barely covered the costs. There were expenses the hospital had to bear itself. Then he pulled out a third file, a patient without insurance. The room suddenly went quiet. "What about this one?" He just shrugged slightly. "Sometimes we receive very little. Sometimes we receive nothing." That is the biggest secret that most people never see on the bill. The patient looks at the number printed on the paper. The hospital looks at the number that will actually flow into their bank account many weeks or months later. Those two numbers are sometimes very far apart. A cardiologist once told me while washing his hands before surgery, "We treat everyone the same." He looked at me and continued, "But the balance sheet doesn't look at everyone the same." It sounds cold, but that is a reality no hospital can avoid. Same hallway, same bed, same team of doctors. However, behind every patient is a completely different pair. That is the person who actually decides how much the hospital collects after everything is done. That is why hospital directors don't just track the number of daily treatments. They also track another, much more important number: the percentage of patients belonging to each payment group. If this percentage changes for just a few months, the whole financial picture changes color. The noteworthy thing is that the hospital has absolutely no control over it. No one can choose which patients will walk through the door. No one knows how many people tomorrow will be covered by private insurance, how many belong to public insurance programs, or how many will have no payment source at all. It's like steering a giant ship through thick fog. The ship must keep running. The engine must keep working, but the helmsman has no idea if there are calm seas ahead or a financial storm waiting. And when I understood that, I realized an even more terrifying truth. Even if the hospital has enough patients and a good payment source, they can still fall into a crisis if operating costs continue to escalate faster than the speed of cash flowing in. The machine that is never allowed to stop. I used to think the hospital's final secret was insurance, but the deeper I went into the financial reports, the more I realized there was something even scarier. Hospitals don't just need to make money, they have to make money. WF, every day, not to get rich, but to keep the entire giant machine breathing. One morning, I stood in the control room looking down at the whole hospital campus. Hundreds of employees were starting their shifts. Medicine carts rolled down the hallways. The air conditioning system was still running. Elevators continuously opened and closed. Everything seemed normal, but the financial director was looking at a different screen. It wasn't a patient monitoring screen. It was the daily revenue board, he said softly. "How many imaging schedules are left today?" "Quite a few are empty." He stayed silent for a few seconds. "Let's hope the afternoon will be fully booked." That was when I understood. There are rooms that if left empty for too long, the hospital will start to feel the weight right in that month. Not because the machine stops consuming electricity, not because the employees get time off, but because all expenses keep running like clockwork. A technician smiled half-jokingly as he passed the MRI machine. "You see? This machine doesn't know how many customers it has today. It only knows that every month it needs money to survive." The statement sounded funny, but it reflected the true reality. A machine worth millions of dollars cannot be left idle for too long. A modern operating room is the same. A team of specialist doctors is even more so. They are all extremely expensive assets, but assets only create value when used continuously. That is why hospitals always try to maintain stable treatment schedules. One surgery is completed. The next one follows immediately. A patient leaves the imaging room. A few minutes later, another walks in. A lab just returns results. It immediately receives new samples. The entire operating system is like an assembly line where no gaps are allowed to appear, because as soon as those gaps prolong, the cash flow will start to slow down. Meanwhile, salaries still have to be transferred on time. Equipment maintenance fees still have to be paid. Medicines still have to be stocked. Electricity, water bills, and hundreds of other expenses still appear one after another. None of them wait for the hospital to make enough money before arriving. An operations manager once told me in a very calm voice, "The most dangerous thing is not having few patients." Then what is it? It is having too many days where the services that generate major revenue are not operating at full capacity. That answer made all the puzzle pieces start fitting together. A hospital can be very crowded. Hallways can always be full. Waiting rooms might have no empty seats. But if the departments that bring in the main revenue do not maintain a steady pace of operation, the financial machine behind them will gradually lose its balance. And when that imbalance prolongs, many people begin to see a strange phenomenon. There are hospitals full of doctors, modern equipment, and still crowded with patients. But in the end, they are put up for sale at a price that makes everyone think they just found the bargain of a lifetime. In reality, that is the biggest trap waiting for the buyer ahead. The most expensive bargain many people have ever bought. The more I tracked hospitals that had closed, the more I saw a detail repeating itself strangely. Before things went bad, someone always appeared with the exact same thought. They are selling it so cheap, I must be hitting the jackpot. At first glance, everything is perfect. A building tens of thousands of square meters wide. Operating room lights are still on. MRI machines are still working. The oxygen system, laboratory, treatment areas, everything is complete. The selling price is only a fraction of the money once spent to build it. It is hard for anyone to resist the feeling that they just discovered a bargain. An investor once said during negotiations, "Once we buy it, everything is already set up." The financial advisor sitting opposite asked just one question. "Are you sure you are buying a hospital, or are you buying bills?" The whole room fell silent. It took me a long time to understand the meaning of that question. What the buyer gets is not just the building. They also get the payroll of thousands of employees. Machine maintenance contracts, massive electricity bills, cleaning costs, insurance costs, supply costs, and hundreds of other payments that still regularly appear at the beginning of each month. There is no pause button, there is no slow down button. They still arrive on time. An operations manager once opened the expense spreadsheet and pointed to a long row of numbers. "Fewer patients this month? Good, so we can save some money, right?" He laughed out loud. "I wish it were that simple." He slid his finger to the bottom of the table. Salaries are the same. Machines still need maintenance. Medicines still need stocking. Shifts still need enough people. The building still needs to open. In other words, a hospital cannot shrink according to the number of patients. Expenses stand still. Only revenue changes. That is why so many people mistakenly buy something else. They think they are buying an asset. In reality, they are buying a machine that burns money by the hour. If the number of patients using revenue-generating services does not increase rapidly, the gap between money going out and money coming in will grow larger every month. At first, it's just a few late payments, then contracts that need extending, then equipment that can't be replaced yet. Finally, the difficult decisions that no director wants to make. A long-time employee once stood at the hospital gate looking at the "for sale" sign and whispered, "The building is still as beautiful as the first day. Why did it come to this?" No one answered. Because the answer does not lie in the walls. It lies in the stream of patients that was no longer enough to feed the whole machine behind it. By then, I understood that a low selling price has never reflected the true value of a hospital. It merely reflects the level of difficulty the previous owner could no longer bear. But even that trap is not the final chapter of the story, because there was once a corporation that owned dozens of hospitals with billions of dollars in annual revenue, seemingly impossible to collapse. And yet, in just a few years, that entire empire fell in a way that made the entire American healthcare industry rethink the whole game. The empire that collapsed because of what no one could see. At this point, all the puzzle pieces have almost come together. The hospital does not sell medicine. It does not make the most money from the emergency room. It doesn't get rich just because there are many patients. And it cannot survive just because of a modern building. But I still have one final question. What happens if a hospital system has almost everything and still fails? The answer appeared in a dossier thousands of pages thick. It is the story of Steward Healthcare. At one point, this was one of the largest private hospital systems in America. Dozens of hospitals, millions of treatments every year, revenues reaching hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars. Looking from the outside, no one thought such a machine could stagger. An employee once said in a meeting, "We are this big now. What else is there to worry about?" No one answered. A few years later, that same question echoed in an almost empty room. But this time, many chairs were unoccupied. What caught my attention was not the revenue numbers. It was the speed at which money left the business: facility rental fees, payments to suppliers, operating costs, system maintenance costs. Every expense followed another like waves that never stop. Meanwhile, the cash flow from highly profitable services began to slow down. Not completely disappear, just a bit slower. But with a giant machine, sometimes slowing down just a few beats is enough to make all the gears behind it start shaking. A supplier called. Last month's payment still hasn't been received. The finance department asked for more time. Shortly after, another call came. Then yet another call. Those small signs connected into a long string that outsiders almost couldn't see. Until the day a few hospitals had to close. The once brightly lit hallways became silent. Ambulances had to drive further to find a receiving facility. The people didn't lose a building. They lost something more important: the right to access timely care. That is also when I understood why many people always value a hospital by its concrete, machines, or land area. They have looked at the wrong assets. An MRI machine can be repurchased. An operating room can be rebuilt. A building can be repaired. But no one can instantly buy the trust of patients, a network of good doctors, or a steady stream of people coming in every day. That is the real asset. If the stream of patients using revenue-generating services gradually disappears, the entire machine will lose its fulcrum, no matter how new the building is or how modern the equipment is. And after all the records, interviews, and closed hospitals, there is one conclusion that I believe is truer than any number on a financial report. A hospital has never been rich because it owns expensive walls. It only truly exists when, every day, there are still patients walking through those doors, bringing in enough revenue stream to keep the whole system running. That is the most valuable asset, and it is also the most fragile thing that any hospital in the world is trying to hold on to.